The event is free, but we're asking donations. You can do it through PayPal or cash. And I think we've made it real easy for you to see how to donate. But I wanted to mention that. So with no further ado, we'll open the meeting with a moment of silence, followed by the serenity prayer. God,
Higher
Grant me the
power,
serenity
grant me the
to
serenity.
accept the things I cannot
Accept
change,
things I
the
cannot
courage to change the things I can,
courage to change the
and the
things I
wisdom
can.
to know the difference.
Wisdom to know the difference.
and with that, we're here to hear Bonnie M share. Bonnie M is the chairperson of the literature group that brought this incredible book that we have, the Loving Parent Guidebook is the name of the book. So Bonnie M encountered ACA in 2014 after years of intensive personal developmental work and meditation practice. She's passionate about reparenting and carrying the message. She has led workshops and classes on communication, empathy, and mindfulness since 2008. She chairs the Loving Parent Guidebook subcommittee. And without further ado, let's welcome Bonnie M.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for all your support in getting here. And thank you for having me, Intergroup. It's a real honor to be your first person coming in and doing an event here. So I'm really pleased. And I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in making this happen today. I think it's really wonderful that this is the first post-pandemic. Well, I know we're still in the pandemic, but this is the first live event that I've been to with this many people for ACA. And as much as I like Zoom and doing workshops on Zoom, I really love being in person. So I'm really, really happy to be here with you all. And I also want to thank a few other people. If there is anybody online from the Loving Parent Guidebook subcommittee, any volunteers, I just want to thank them, because this book just, I hope you'll know when you read it that so much love and care went into creating it. So many ACAs worked on it to make it be as gentle and loving and practical as possible. So I want to thank them. I want to thank Kate, who has been especially helpful with that project. And thank my husband, who's here, who has been very loving and supportive for 27 years and who was living and breathing this Loving Parent Guidebook project with me from day one. And he knows my whole story. So he's here, and I'm really thankful that he's here, even though he's heard it many times. And I also want to thank all of you, because we were driving up and it's such a beautiful fall day and you chose to be here. And I know you'd have many other things to do with your time and attention. So thank you. Thank you so much. So as Guy was saying, I'm the chair of the Loving Parent Guidebook subcommittee. That is a subcommittee out of the World Services Organization, which is the organization that helps disseminate information about ACA and is our, I guess, the trustees are considered the governing body. They don't really govern, but they're keeping us alive. So that's what this is. It was originated by a ballot proposal that came out of Florida in my home group. I was the one who had the idea, and they said, hey, write it up. And I did, and it passed, and here we are. And it started really getting active in November 17, and we had our first team meeting on January 2018, and it's been now 4 years since I first started working on this. And what I'll cover today, just so you have a sense, is I'm going to share my story, and I'm telling a story about the journey from hurting to healing to helping and how it resulted in this book. And then I'm going to offer some suggestions, just maybe things to think of as you start to explore working in the guidebook, even though, as Lawrence said, you don't need my tips. You will all figure it out together. That's what this beautiful fellowship and community is about. But I will offer them nonetheless, based on things that we've gotten as questions and where people seem to be needing some support. And then we'll open the floor for questions and comments that people have. So just want to check if you would raise your hand if you're not hearing me well. Okay, and we're good on the hybrid. Okay, hello. All right. So just want to start this off by saying that the story that I'm about to tell is about the journey that I took that led to the development of the reparenting check-in, this very simple 4-step process that changed my life, as well as the Loving Parent Guidebook. And how in part of that process is how I came to see that I was being driven by the wounded parts of me, by my inner child, by my inner teenager, and that those were the reasons why I was feeling a lot of shame and low self-worth, because there was abandonment in my childhood, and that was needing to be repaired and healed. That caused me to reenact the abandonment when they took the driver's seat. Lots of chaos ensued. And I then abandoned myself. So it was really this process to understand all of that. And it took time. I was 40 when I started this journey that I'm going to tell you about. But I really started ACA when I think I was 42. So I was doing a lot of other things, and they were really helpful, but they did not hit the nail on the head like this program does for dysfunction. And I would say that process truly took a long time, but it truly began with the insight that I was terrified of abandonment. And you would have told me I was terrified of abandonment before, I would have said, no, I'm not terrified of abandonment. I'll leave. I don't need to be with this person. It was a bluff. This was my inner teenager, and I thought I was stronger and more independent than I was. And I think I needed that to survive my childhood. I needed to believe that. So the journey that I'm describing is the journey that we're all on, and I'm so grateful that we can all do it together and support one another. And I know that we're all in the process of learning who we truly are, and that we are already love, and that we have the ability to be our own loving parent. That seed is already there and has been there. It just needs to be uncovered. And so, okay, I'm going to check how I'm feeling in this moment, because like I'm leaning into you all. Just take a little step back. I was feeling pretty wobbly about this talk because I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to approach it. And I like to do workshops because I have this sense that I'm doing something for you. And as the hero child, that's way more comfortable for me than to tell you my story. And as I was dealing with all this wobbliness and checking in with my inner child, it was really interesting. The things that I thought I was scared about were not the things I was scared about. And that's the value of connecting with my inner child and checking with her instead of assuming I know. And when I checked in with her and just said like, oh my God, like what's going on for you? It seemed really, really agitated and scared and terrified. And I feel my heart racing, and saw this image of myself as a little 9-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid in 3rd grade. And I grew up on marijuana farms in the 70s and 80s. There were no dispensaries around the corner that you could go to. And my parents could have gotten 10 to 20 years for what they were doing. They had 50-acre farms with lots of marijuana growing under these pine trees in Florida. I don't know how the cops didn't smell that, but because driving in Denver, you do smell it. But anyway, I lived with the terror that my mom was going to go to jail, and my stepdad, who I didn't really like, was also going to go. And who was I going to go to? You know, if my mom was taken, then I was with my stepdad. If my stepdad, they were both taken. Very scary situation, although I totally stuffed that, because people would say, oh, it must have been so scary when I would tell my story. And I'd say, not really. It's kind of interesting and fun. And but it was terrifying to her. And in 3rd grade, we had show and tell. And I moved many, many times, over 10 times as a kid, to different schools. And I never really remember doing show and tell before, but the first time I did show and tell, it was about what your parents do. And, you know, everyone's all excited, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's not good. And I told my mom, and my mom said, well, just tell them the truth. And I thought, really? And I said, you mean I can tell them we grow marijuana? And she said, no, you can't tell them that. just tell him your dad's a pilot. That's why he travels all the time. So I had to lie. I had to keep a secret. I had to lie. And she sees you all as people who might get my family in trouble. And also it's just a sad story. And I think she doesn't necessarily like to tell it. Doesn't like me to tell it. There I can feel a little sadness. I think dysfunction is really sad when we take in the cost. When you think about your family, then I think about my family and everyone touched. There's a real loss because these are beautiful people with wonderful qualities. And then these parts of ourselves take over that are wounded from all of the hurt from the past. And I just think about my dad, for example, who died at 63. He was a natural born leader. He was very charismatic. He was also abusive and narcissistic and many other things. But I saw how he could command a room, and I saw his wisdom. He was able to be connected at times, even though he was an alcoholic and chain smoker and used marijuana and all kinds of other substances. But I could see his spirit, and to see that how it evolved was very, very sad. And so talking about my story, even though I know it, just brings those feelings up. And I can just let my little girl know it's okay. It's okay. These are friends. It's family. We can talk. We can trust. We can feel. And this is how we heal, by telling our story, by allowing the past to be what it was, and loving oneself. So thank you. So I wanted to structure this talk in terms of the journey that so many of us take in our lives. It's universal across cultures and myths and all of that, where we see this pattern of how something can evolve. And so I've structured it that way. But to respect traditions, I'm not really going to talk about what I structured it to, but hopefully you'll get the sense of it. And so I want to start out in my life in 2012, a couple years before I encountered ACA, to just give you a sense of what it was like. Like, what was my ordinary life like? And, as Guy said, I had been a seeker since I was a young person, and I've done a lot of meditation. I've done a lot of communication. I've done a lot of those things that were very helpful for this work, and that we have included in this guidebook to support the process. But I still had this, I was bonded to my critical parent. It was as if what my critical parent said was the gospel. I shouldn't have said that. I believed I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have looked at the person that way. That's the truth. And it was scrutinizing me because of the way that I grew up, and because my mom also scrutinized. It was always, well, what are you doing there? And what's that on you? And just, there was never this chance to just be. So my critical parent, I learned, has a positive intention to help me avoid recreating those situations that got me shamed or blamed or whatever else in the first place. But I no longer need to be spoken to that way. So I was bonded. I had a lot of shame. As I said, I was the hero child, and I really thought I could save my family and redeem things. And I did pretty well in school, and I started my own company and all kinds of things. And no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. It wasn't as good as that company who was bigger. It wasn't as good as those people who had more friends. It wasn't as good as that. So comparing was really strong. And at this point in time, in 2012, I was working on a memoir to talk about my childhood. And I was having trouble. I could put it all down. I could put the stories down, and I interviewed my parents, but I was having trouble getting, like, people would say to me, I just want to know how you feel. I'm not sure I know how you feel. they would say when they read what I wrote. And I thought, it's right there. Can't you see? And then they would ask me this other question that I really didn't like for a long time. Well, what did this mean to you? And I'm like, And what I realized is I kind of needed to do more of this work to really understand that. I have a much better sense of that now. And again, like I said, my inner teenager was on the scene a lot. She had her flamethrower and she would get testy with people. And I thought I was stronger and more independent than I was. So if you said something to me, I might not say something to you directly, but I would. Anybody else around me would hear it. Philippe would hear it. So at this time, I also was with my husband, and we had been together for 22 since I was 22. So at that time, quite a long time now already. And we had a good relationship. We were both seekers. We were both interested in the same things, which really helped. And we wanted to do our work. But we had this dynamic where we'd get into a conflict and Philippe would withdraw. And he'd go into what we'd call like the iceberg. He'd freeze. And I would get out the ice pick and I'd try to, hey, come back. And then if that didn't work, I'd get that flamethrower out and I'd say like, hey, you know what? I don't need you. I can be out of here. Okay, I'm fine. I'll do just fine. And all bluffs. I mean, I just would get to that place and I didn't understand that that was just another guise of the fear of abandonment. I'm going to create that. And that's driven by that fear of abandonment. So we had some things to work out, but we had a good relationship. And my mom, I loved her. I knew she loved me to the best of her ability. She didn't show me the love I wanted, the way I wanted it, but I knew that she cared about me. But we had these old patterns where I try to rescue her. She had my whole childhood, she'd come into my room and say, get your crap, we're out of here. She'd throw a bag and she'd say, just pack it up and we're out of here. And then we would leave and then we'd always go back. And I honestly always thought she was going to leave my dad at some point. I mean, I'm like a slow learner. I just really did not understand that. I'm sorry, that's not actually nice to say. I had a hard time breaking that denial that she was not going to leave. I think that's ableist to say slow learner, which is why I wanted to say that. And the other thing is that I had some hope, very, very covert hope that she would be able to see me and give me what I needed, the way that other people in my life were able to. I was lucky to have these older women in my life who were kind of these surrogate moms. And I thought, well, why can't my own mother do that? And she just didn't get it herself. She couldn't give away something that she wasn't given. And my dad, as I said, he was this big hotshot pot dealer and they were making lots of money and living the high life. And things went downhill when I was about 13 and he got out of the business and I think he never found his way back. And he went into a big decline. At this point, he was drinking almost half a gallon of liquor a day. He liked vodka and whiskey. He was chain smoking. He was smoking marijuana. And then at some point he was taking Xanax, I think, pills for his anxiety. So this man who had been so vibrant, kind of just really slowly withdrawing. I'm just gonna check the time. Okay, way off, just be prepared. Let me just say for my family, what I discovered over time and had already been learning through the work of my memoir was that there were generations of dysfunction on both sides. And they were different types of dysfunction, but they really, gosh, I have 3 brothers who are addicts. My 2 sisters are functional. They're more high functioning like me. But my 3 brothers, one of them is in prison. He's been in and out of prison. And it's tragic. It's really tragic. But at this point in 2012, my mom, I guess she just got fed up with my dad and she cooked up a scheme she bought this foreclosure in Michigan for $12,000, this house. It was near where my dad's parents were. And they started growing marijuana in the basement. My dad got this marijuana license for growing, something like that. User, he was a user. He wasn't supposed to be growing, but it didn't matter. And she talked him into staying up there because you got to tend the plants. And it worked. And he was so bad off at that point. It was really sad. But very shortly after that period of time, my grandma had a stroke. And I loved my grandma. I wasn't very close to her, but no one else was going to be there besides my dad, who I did not think was going to be able to be with her for her last days. And they brought her into hospice, brought her in, and she was there. And my husband and I decided we will go. We had done enough work we thought we could be a good presence to be there with her, and also just an important thing to witness. And so we were there. It was lovely, but my dad, we couldn't get him over. And the one time we got him over, he brought his microscope that he had just gotten to examine when his buds would be ready. And he wanted my husband, who's very technical and handy, to help him. And he's sitting up there in the dining room. My grandmother's in the living room, dying. And he doesn't even look in the room, doesn't even talk about her. And God, it was so sad. And his brother, the same thing. My aunt didn't even come. And my husband and I were there with my grandmother when she took her last breath. We were both holding her hands. And I just feel so good that I had done enough work to be able to do that. But so sad for the rest of them. And my grandfather was in a nursing home, and I loved him dearly. He'd always been very kind to me. And I said to my dad, well, we got to go tell Grandpa. And he said, well, you handle that. And I could not get him to go. And so Philippe and I went, and I told my grandfather, and he just said, I said, I'm really sorry Grandma died. And he just said, that was it. And I thought, well, things are starting to clarify. And what he did say when we said goodbye to him at the very end, when we left, we went back down our way to Florida. We went and visited him one more time and talked with him. And he said at the very end, he said, why doesn't he visit me? And it was just so sad. I mean, my gosh, I don't want to be crying all the time, but yeah, tragic. Just to see how each generation is impacted and how then what happens downstream comes back upstream. I did not want that with my mother. I had always lived far away from her. I had separated from my family, but I had not individuated. And for me, the individuation was becoming my own person, understanding that my needs and my feelings were okay, and it was fine if they were different from theirs. And that was a really crucial, important insight along the journey. And so we moved down there. We made all these changes to our wonderful life in Cambridge, and we thought, all right, we're ready. We're going to move down to Florida, and we're ready to deal with family. This was what I said anyway. I can't speak for Philippe. And we bought this place. It needed to be remodeled, and we started the process. And about 3 months after my mom came back from being, seeing my dad in Michigan to live, I thought, she said, hey, your dad's just not getting his surgery for this hernia. I'm going to go up there and take care of him. And I'm thinking, I just moved here and our cousin's coming down to visit during the time that you're going to be gone. And at this point, I did get mad. And I said to her, hey, you made an agreement with our cousin, with our cousin. And she said, oh, you can entertain her. And this was frequently what happened with my mother. It was like, oh, you can handle that. And so she did eventually come down for part of the time, but then she was right back up there. And then that summer she called me and she said, I really hate to call you and tell you this, but I've decided that I'm going to stay up here. I feel guilty because I feel like I'm abandoning you. And I'm shocked, speechless. I'm thinking, I just moved, and couldn't you figure this out ahead of time? And my typical thing was to brush it off, or to not say that it really bothered me as much to the person that I was upset with. And then I'd go vent to somebody else that I was upset with. But I remember just being shocked. And then she changed the subject to something funny, which is what she often did. And I kind of, wait, I got to get back to that, but we didn't. And I told other people about it who said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I had this one friend that was my mom's age, and she goes, your mother's not a mother. which was somewhat gratifying to hear, but it didn't solve the problem inside me. What I'm saying about that is that I didn't really allow myself to feel what that was like. It was still at the level of story. And I was not yet ready to fix and resolve that dysfunction and that abandonment stuff with my mom, because I had heard about ACA, but I didn't come right then. But at Thanksgiving, she was going to come down and be with me and the rest of the family. And she said, you know, the only reason I'm coming down is because I feel guilty about you. And I thought, I don't think that's not what I want to hear. And I said, you know, that doesn't feel good to hear, Mom. I don't want you to come down because you feel guilty. I want you to come because you love me and you want to spend time with your family down here. And just don't come if that's what it's about. And that spurred me into ACA. I started looking up all these talks online. I found a woman who did a workshop. She was a therapist, and she was talking about the hero child. And I just was crying as I was listening to it on the highway. And she also explained something really important for me to know, which was that my shame came from this progression where there was fear, there was tension, all this stuff happening in the family. And I, as a child, couldn't do anything about it. But I could take the blame and say that that was my fault. And it's a coping survival mechanism. If I'm the one who's wrong, well, I can fix me, right? So it's kind of a beautiful gesture, even though it ends up with this shame that's really difficult. But I have heard lately that shame is self-protective. So that can be helpful to know too. So I started doing that. I even sent that to my mom, and my mom listened to it, and she said, but the lady does sound kind of depressing. And but I told her, I said, you know, this is how it felt. And she was able to somewhat hear it. And then I forgot about ACA. I was going to these 6 meetings. I went to the 6 meetings. Then my remodel, we moved back into our remodel, and I kind of forgot, interestingly enough. But then I had this certification that I had been working on for years that was really important to me. I knew how to do this thing really well, and I choked. I choked in public. I failed. People were saying, no, don't pass her. I had never had that happen to me before. It was devastating. And then at the same time, my dad fell sick again. He'd been in the hospital before, but he fell and broke his back, probably too much, just out of it. And it was terrible. We went up there, and just to see the heart failure be so bad, and the doctors were kind of looking at us like, what do you want us to do? I mean, this is a pretty bad situation here. And I was speaking with a colleague who said, go to ACA. And I was like, thank you for the reminder. Yes. And then I was new to 12 steps. I just thought, okay, I'll go to a bunch of meetings. And I got the big red book, and I was starting to read that. I would hear people in meetings talk about their inner child, their inner teenager. What a revelation. That's like, oh, I'm just not a terrible person. That's my inner teenager. And then they talk about the critical parent and the loving parent. And I felt this hope and support. Wow, I had people who knew what it was like, and they could help me. Then I started going to 3 to 4 meetings a week. I started really liking it. I found my meetings and my people, and I got a sponsor. I started working the yellow book, and I started calling fellow travelers when I was in distress instead of just staying in distress. That was a nice experience. And I'd go for fellowship afterward. They said, if somebody says to go after for fellowship, invites you, go. So I did, and it became my main focus. I dropped a lot of the other things I was doing because this addressed the problem. And then I had some tests. I was tested to, I think, really understand who's who and what's what, and what I could trust. And that certification I choked on, I had another opportunity to finish it up. And so I thought, well, I will do it. I worked so hard, let's try. I went out there. I had just barely started working with my sponsor. And I meet this guy who starts flattering me and telling me all these wonderful things. And, my husband is very loving to me, but he's not like saying all these wonderful, you're beautiful, I want to cross the oceans for you. Like, this is not his style, and probably would creep me out. This guy had some kind of, I don't know what it was. He was speaking to my inner child, who had never really been told she was beautiful or any of those kind of things by her family. And my sponsor, I'm so glad that I talked to my sponsor about this instead of just continuing the text flirtations in hiding, because that was not good. And she said, you know, maybe this is your inner teenager who's trying to fill the needs and the lack for that wounded inner child. And that was a big eye opener. Like, oh, wow, my inner child is just thinking that that love's going to come from somewhere and she's desperate for it. And the inner teenager's like, we will take care of this problem. And that's not going to work. She said, that doesn't matter how wonderful that relationship is. You are the only one who can be your own loving parent and reclaim that little girl. And that helped me trust the program, and it helped me trust her. It helped me really trust reparenting too. And it protected my marriage, which I'm really grateful for. And then in step 3, I had another test where something happened, where a situation happened where my husband needed me to trust him. And he was trustworthy, but I was terrified. I could not sleep. I could not eat. I lost 10 pounds. I looked like this. My hands were shaking all the time. I just felt excruciating terror. And those were the deep abandonment fears. And I could no longer deny that I had this fear of abandonment. And I didn't know it at the time, but it repeated something that happened with my mother when I was 5 years old. But it helped me admit powerlessness. I mean, to be in that state, I really had to say, I can't do anything about this. I'm powerless over this. And it also helped me understand the solution viscerally. And that was so helpful to know everything else I have tried has not worked. The solution is to become my own loving parent. And that's the answer. And that motivated me big time. And it just made everything simple. That was my focus. Everything else I had done before was helpful, but it just wasn't this. Broke the denial. And I went back to step 1, that question where they say what traits you identify with. I had to check trait 4 and trait 12, which I had previously said, no, I don't have a sick need for abandonment. And I'm not a dependent personality. Well, yes, I am. I am terrified of abandonment. But I think the thing that's nice to know about that is it's very subtle and it's unconscious. It's not like we're walking around saying, oh, I'm afraid of abandonment. It shows up in different ways. For me, it showed up as perfectionism, big time perfectionism, as approval seeking, guilty feelings for saying no or saying I don't agree, over responsibility, all those traits. And I asked my sponsor for her counselor's number because she had spoken highly of her. And I started seeing her once a week. I was so desperate. And it was really interesting when I first started meeting with her. She said, honey, you're wounded. And if I would have heard that before, I would have been, the shame would have brought up that inner teenager. Like, how dare you say I'm wounded? But here I could really hear it with the compassion of, oh, I don't have to hold myself up to this perfection standard anymore. Like, I went through some stuff. I can give myself a break. And it was really helpful. And I'd say that the thing that was so beautiful is that she sat me down at some point in front of a mirror, and it was full length mirror. And she said, just look into your eyes. And I as soon as I started doing that, I could feel my chin trembling. And she said, what do you want to say to her? And I made this connection with my inner child in this one eye. It's almost as if I could connect to her. And all I could think to say was, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I abandoned you for so long. And I want to be here for you. And it really helped me realize, like, I don't want to reenact that abuse by listening to my critical parent and believing it, by acting out of my inner teenager or even my inner child. I need to have that loving parent in the seat. And what a blessing, because it helped me understand that only I can abandon my inner child today. You know, she's not dependent on caretakers as a child. I'm here. I'm going to take care of her. And so I had to face these fears that I had spent a lifetime not wanting to really face, or thinking I was facing them through the different techniques I was using. And I had to face that self-abandonment. And I needed help. I had to really prepare. If we think about going for a journey, we're going to pack the backpack and we're going to get the food and the water and everything we need. So I needed that. And my sustenance was to really understand that this, whatever was happening in the present moment, was not the past, even though it sure felt like it. That person who had treated me that way certainly reminded me of my dad, unconsciously maybe, but that was not my dad. And I didn't need to react as if it were. Boundaries, I had to learn, first of all, what they were and how to apply them, and that it was okay to have them. That was a big one. Like, I'm allowed. It's okay for me to say no, even to my family. It's okay to have these feelings. A big one that my counselor would say, I'd write her distressed about something, or my sponsor too, and it's okay to be who and where you are. Really? I don't have to fix this problem. I don't have to fix this feeling. My counselor would often ask me, so when I was feeling something, so who is that? What part of you is that? And she called it an ego state, but we don't really talk about that here so much. And I started to learn, oh, when I'm feeling this way, often that's my inner child. When I'm feeling angry and rageful and defensive, oh, that's often my inner teenager. And it was so helpful to know, oh, I can tie a feeling with a part of myself and then nurture that part. I have something to do. I can step out of the problem and into the solution. I can allow them to have their feelings and care for them. That was a revelation, and it was the seeds for the reparenting check-in, because I took that and I took the nurturing part that she would have me do. Okay, so how can you nurture that part of yourself? And I put it into a 4-step process using some of my own background, and it's in chapter 9. That's what the whole chapter 9 is about, is a check-in. I also needed to work on this distorted thinking, the personalizing, taking things personally. Oh my gosh, it's not all about me. As that person says, I'm not the piece of crap the world's revolving around. Then I had to work on projection. You know, if I wanted to be scared, I just had to think of what was going to happen in the future. I didn't need to do that to myself anymore. I also had to recognize all of those faulty beliefs that I had. The false beliefs that we talk about in the guidebook. I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm bad. And I had to really remind myself and teach myself that I'm enough, just as I am, just right now. It's okay. I don't have to be anything or anyone. It's like, I'm okay. I had to learn to understand who was in the driver's seat, so that I was coming from a healthy place rather than my 5-year-old, my 13-year-old. And I really needed to catch that critical parent. Even though it has a positive intent, and I understand what the intent is, I don't need to be listening to that today. I was lucky to have nieces and nephews that I saw regularly who were young, and I got these parenting books because they were from dysfunctional families and they were fighting, and I thought, how do I deal with this? And those books were so helpful because I could apply them with my nieces and nephews, but then I applied them with myself. Like, oh, one line that I took from one of the books was to just be with myself, put my hand on my heart and say, like, you don't have to be, you're not alone with these big feelings. And I would say that to my nieces too. They get in these fights and I'd say, just put a hand on the back and say, you're not alone with these big feelings. You can feel what you need to feel, sweetie. And that was really beautiful. And I just really wanted to not reenact the abuse to myself. Then part of this whole coming to terms with things was that I also, did I just feel like I skipped something? Oh yeah, I did skip something. The next thing I really needed to do was I was prepared. I had a better understanding of things. I did my step 4 and my step 5. My sponsor was very helpful in helping me break down some of the remaining denial, because I think in question in step 1 or 2, it said, which parent was abusive? And I said, it would be hard to say that my mother was neglectful. I mean, just amazing for me to look at that now and think, how on earth did I have that impression? But I did, I needed to. And so she really helped me face the truth that I was parentified from an early age, where I was the role reversal. I'm suddenly the parent taking care of her feelings and her problems and listening to her vent about her husband and all these problems. I was neglected. I don't remember once in my childhood her saying, hey, what would you like to do? What are you interested in? How are you? How do you feel? I mean, I don't remember that. I was not protected. Look where I lived, on illegal pot farms with AK-47s. I mean, just insane. And then keeping secrets, not being able to tell my siblings that my biological dad was different than their dad, and just all this stuff. I remember one time, another thing I had to come to grips was why was I the rescuer with my mother? And I think it started probably before this, but a memory was that she told me at one point, she was looking at me, brushing my hair or something, and she said, you have your dad's eyes, my biological dad, who I never met. And she started getting all these tears. And she said, he broke my heart, but I got you out of it. And I think for me, I thought, well, that's nice, but that's a lot of, I feel guilty and responsible somehow for this. And now I have to take care of this heartbroken person. So I had to come to grips with all of that wasn't closeness, that was enmeshment, and that was not really something for a little girl to be hearing. I had to come to terms with letting go of trying to save my family and feeling bad because I couldn't do it, but it was never anything I could have done. And then this little shock came where I was talking to my mom, trying to fill in some of those worksheets. And she just nonchalantly said, oh, well, yeah, that was the year you stayed with grandma and grandpa for kindergarten. And I had always just thought that I lived, like I was at my grandparents a lot. I didn't know I lived there. And she said, oh yeah, I dropped you just off after your birthday in April. And I picked you up before 6th grade. You mean I was there the whole time? Did you come and visit me? Well, yeah, I probably did. I don't really remember. I'm sure I called you. And I mean, I don't want to say all this and have it sound like I'm blaming my mother or denigrating her, because she is a wonderful person. She has a really big heart. She is profoundly wounded that she didn't even understand the impact of that. And she was up there setting up the pot farm with my stepdad. So that's what was going on. And he chose my mother. He said, I had the pick of all the women, but I chose your mom because she was a really good mom to you. Then I remember thinking, then why did you take her from me? Well, I feel like I'm getting a little lost in the details now. So let me just come back. The main point is that I could see that it was not just my dad who was involved in this dysfunction, because I always thought it was him. I could see my mom leaving and getting out of that situation probably wouldn't have changed much at all. And now that my dad's dead, I can see it didn't change anything. She was codependent and wounded in her own ways. And the other thing I had to confront was really this pain that I felt about seeing my dad decline. I think I'd kind of kept that away, just like I had kept away my brother being in prison. And those things I had to feel and grieve. And so I visited my family in Michigan, my mom and my dad. I stayed at an Airbnb, which was really a win for me because I didn't want to be in that environment. I wanted my space. And so it's like, wow, I had the permission from myself to do that, thanks to ACA. And my dad was there. He was now in a wheelchair because of his accident, still drinking the same quantity. A friend of mine said, when I was telling her how painful it was, have you ever thought of asking him, gosh, Dad, it seems like you're killing yourself. Why are you doing that? I wanted to ask that question. And I went home. I went to see him. I sat on the porch. We were watching the Munsters. We had a little, exchange back and forth. This is what I would do with my dad. We'd sit in front of the TV because that was safer than talking face to face. And he'd say something, I'd say something. I kept waiting. I kept wanting to get that question out. And it wouldn't come out. My throat was tied up. I just couldn't say it. And that was the don't talk rule. We don't talk about that. I could write him about alcoholism. I've sent plenty of letters, but to say face-to-face, I couldn't do it. And that made me so sad. I remember going to an ACA meeting just sobbing about not being able to do that. So at this point in the story, I've done a lot of work. I'm still growing as my loving parent, but I'm not driven by that abandonment fear in the same way. So I have a lot more freedom. I'm not counting on my mother to do what I can do for myself. And my parents come down, they winter in Florida at their house where my brother lives. And my mom and my brother set up this tent out by the pool so that my dad can drink and smoke and watch TV without disturbing them. So there he is in his wheelchair. And, Philippe and I go visit. We go to visit a few times. And this one time we're visiting, my dad just casually mentions and shows me these cigarette burns that he has because he's so out of it and he's not being supervised. He falls asleep and he burns himself. And it just was horrifying to see that. And when I told my counselor, she said, "You need to stop going over there. You are enabling him." And I thought, but I'm not bringing alcohol. I'm not bringing any substances. I'm not drinking. And she said, "That doesn't matter. You're saying your lifestyle is okay." That was huge. I thought, oh gosh, that's a big step to say that. But we did. And I feel really good that we did. And then very shortly after that, he got into the hospital again. And my sponsor said, "Well, hey, there's your chance. You got another chance to ask that question." You can tell him how you feel. And gosh, I did not want to do that. I did and I didn't. And I went to that hospital, sat in the car a long time. I had to make a couple fellow traveler calls for sure. But I got the courage, I got my little badge, I walked up there and he was alone, luckily. And there wasn't a TV blaring. He had just had his meal. And I went over and I said, "Dad," he started talking and I said, "Dad, there's just something I really want to get off my heart." And his face, he just looked scared. And I always cry when I say this, so we'll see. I said, "We don't have a relationship because of alcohol." And I started crying. And he kind of went back and forth with his head. And he said, "Now you don't need to get all emotional." And I was so proud that I had this inner loving parent who just spontaneously said, "Yes, I do, Dad, because I have emotions." And he just kind of took a pause. And he said, "Well, I'm not drinking now." And I said, "Well, you just got in here yesterday." So, we talked a little bit longer, but I could see that I wasn't going to be able to say everything I wanted to say, but I at least felt good that I had said what I said. And I left. And I called somebody on the way home, a fellow traveler, and she said, "Girl, you go, girl. Like, I'm so proud of you. And you did the hard thing." And just to have that love and support was so wonderful. I mean, I knew I could call 10 people and they would have been supportive. And that's the beauty of this fellowship. And when I got home, there was a text from my dad that I almost wondered if the nurse wrote or something, because it did not sound like him. And he said, "I just want you to know that your face-to-face intervention meant the world to me. And alcohol has ruined my life. And I don't want to drink anymore." And as far as I know, he didn't drink until he got his diagnosis for throat cancer. And then he said, "Screw it." But it was different. My interactions with him were different because at least he wasn't so tamped down with however much alcohol he was drinking. And I would have been fine had he not said anything. That's the beauty of it. It was for me. It was to give a voice to my inner child. And a friend of mine who was an ACA and Al-Anon said, "Oh my gosh, we have a saying, the addict needs to see your tears." And I thought, that's the difference. Before, I wasn't able to be vulnerable with him and show him how it really hurt and touch me. But there I was, and it made a difference. So I completed the steps. My sponsor always says, it's a circle, not a ladder. You'll do them again. And I do steps 1 through 3 on a regular basis. And I definitely like steps 6 and 7 to work on things that are still there. And all the steps can be daily steps, but I completed the first round of the yellow book. I started sponsoring other people. I developed the reparenting check-in in its mostly current form now, in the worksheet and the handout and stuff. And I started sharing it, and people seemed to really think it was helpful. So simple, they would say, so powerful. We actually have something we can do. And that really excited me. And what I learned to do in this part is I'm trying to maintain my recovery in my program. So I need to keep working on my boundaries with my mom. She starts talking about other people. I just need to, I kept saying to her, let's just talk about you and me. And if they didn't say that to me, I just rather them say it to me. Let's leave them out of it. She didn't understand it first, but she understands it now. And I really individuated, which was so wonderful. My brother would say, hey, want to come over to our party? And I didn't want to go. I'd say, no, but thank you. I didn't have to like, oh my God, should I go? And then my relationship with my husband, Philippe, I understood and learned that it was okay to trust him, that he was someone I could trust. And our dynamic between the frozen and the ice pick, that changed. And we both work our program. And I would say that we have way less conflict than we used to, and we have a lot more love and a lot more care, a lot more support. We had a good amount before, but it's so nice now. And I would also say when conflict comes up, we know how to handle it. We have the tools. We're not spinning out. I'm not threatening him anymore with leaving. And I just continue to deepen my reparenting and use the tools like non-dominant handwriting. I just looked for whatever I could possibly find. And then continue to strengthen that network I had. But then there was another test. In 2016, my parents moved to Colorado. My mom found another foreclosure. And they moved there because they wanted to live in the mountains. And my husband and I wanted to do a road trip to see our niece who was doing an exchange with Texas. She's from Switzerland, and we thought, oh, that'd be fun to go see her there. And so we were going to make this big road trip and do some hiking. And I told my mom's like, oh, you got to come see the new place. And I said, well, we'll see, because I'm not sure how far we're going to be going near you. So I didn't know really if I wanted to or not. And then we ended up being nearby, and I thought, yeah, I do want to go. So I texted my mom. We were sitting in a little cafe, and right away she texts back, oh my gosh, the business is in a tragic situation. It's not a good time for a visit. And I said to Philippe, she said it's not a good time for a visit. And I was like, are you joking? Is this a joke? I'm not somebody who visits you. I'm your daughter. And I think the test was, am I going to stuff it again? And so initially I failed this test. I said, oh God, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope it all works out. And then we got in the car and we were driving, and I started thinking, and my inner teenager said, what the heck is going on? Like this, and she got really upset. And then my inner child was really upset. And I remember talking to Philippe, like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I think I reached out to my counselor because my mom was sending me messages as our trip evolved. It just kills me that I can't see you. And I thought, well, it just kills me that I don't get to see you. That's what bothered me, the language. I was like, you don't get to see me, okay. And I just didn't know how to respond to these messages because I wasn't going to do the old way anymore. And then I said to her simply, with the help of my counselor, she said, maybe you need to take some time and really figure out what's going on. Take a break from your mom. And so I simply wrote my mom back and I said, I have so many feelings about what happened, and I'm not ready to talk about them with you. I need time to process. So I will be in touch with you when I'm ready. I love you, but please don't contact me now. until I contact you. And she said, okay. But then she'd periodically pop a text in like, you doing okay? How you doing? Are you going to be ready to talk to me soon? And I just had to put the boundary again, which often required me calling my sponsor or counselor, like, what do I do? What do I say? And they really, really helped me. But I took 2 months and I wrote a letter to her. Instead of writing a letter of amends, I wrote a letter of, this is what it felt like growing up with you. This is what I have lost. This is what it meant to me. And I was so careful with that letter, all my training and communication, and hopefully the stuff you'll see in the guidebook, how things are worded. It was really careful to try to take ownership, but also talk about the needs that weren't met. And man, my little girl was really terrified when I went and dropped that in the mail. I wrote it by hand. And then my mom called me about a week later and she said, well, I got your letter. And I thought, oh boy. She started crying. She said, it was really beautiful. And everything you said was true. Except the fact that I've always loved you. And I remember hearing that and thinking, like, I was kind of annoyed when she said that, because I thought, well, it sure didn't show in the ways that I needed to show. But now I can understand that from her perspective, she cared about me and she loved me to the best of her ability. So I just, it was so nice to know that she at least read what I said. Well, from what my counselor tells me, who works with many, many ACAs, it's not typical that a parent will say, I acknowledge what you said and it's true, it's valid. A lot of times there's not validation. And she had cautioned me before I wrote that letter. If you're writing that letter because you hope that your mom is going to validate your experience, don't write that letter. You write that letter for you. You write that letter because you want to give your inner child a voice, and your loving parent stands by her the whole time, no matter what the response. So I went into it with that, but I will say it was very heartwarming that she could at least hear it. And then after that, I shared the reparenting check-in in this mindfulness workshop that I did at the first ACA convention in 2016, which happened down in Florida, which is where I started my program. And then at a business meeting a couple months later, they said, hey, there are WSOs looking for ballot proposals. Does anybody have any ideas? And I was sitting there and I said, hey, well, what about an idea for taking chapter 8 and expanding it and making it much more practical with exercises and tools and guided meditations? And they said, write it up. We will submit it. And that's what I did. And it passed unanimously. And then I sent the literature committee some ideas of what I thought could be helpful in that book. And I never heard back, but I also thought, they have a whole crew of people who are doing this. So great, they'll take the information and hopefully they'll use it or not, that's up to them. But then, anyway, hold on, let me transition here. So I didn't really think about it that much anymore. And then we had the opportunity that same year to move back to Cambridge. When my parents were gone, it was hard to leave my nieces and nephews. It was very hard to leave our community. We loved our ACA community, but we just really thought we left a place that we loved for me to have a relationship with my mother who was no longer there. So let's go back to the place we love. And my husband really loves Cambridge, and that seemed important. So back to the start, which I kind of took initially as a failure. Like, oh, it didn't work out, but it really worked out in the best of ways. And the story I just told you about how I have become or am becoming, because it's a process, my own loving parent, is what inspired and informed the Loving Parent Guidebook. So much of my own experience and the tools that I used and that helped me so much are in this guidebook, along with contributions from other people, many other people who helped out on this book. I was grateful that I was asked to chair the project. I definitely hesitated because I knew what it was like to work on a book. And I didn't know how you would work on a book with all adult children, all volunteers, very, very little budget. I don't know that we spent more than $200 on preparing this book. Well, there was some technology stuff, but, and what a big commitment. I mean, I had my own company. I knew what it was like to take an idea to a final product, and it was no small thing. But I waited and I let intuition guide, and my answer from the universe was, yes, do it. You have the experience, and everything you've learned to do will help this project do it. And I was so happy to do my step 12, carry the message in this way. And believe me, this project stretched me many times. It was not always easy, but it was definitely worthwhile. And I'll say that many, many, many dedicated ACAs who worked on this project gave so much heart and care. I mean, we spent hours going over a paragraph. Is this really saying what we wanted to say? The person who I mentioned earlier, Kate, she was so instrumental. I toward the end, especially, we were working on really getting this tight. And I just said, can I call you? She'd say, call. We'd have fun. We were laughing, but we would really try to figure these questions out. We hope that it's going to be practical and gentle and friendly for you. We understand also that this is a spiritual program, and none of us can know what works and when for anyone else. That's something that gets worked out with a higher power. But we do hope maybe this will point you in the right direction or point you in the wrong direction, which might put you in the right direction somehow. And that working with other people will really help you live in the solution, because that's what it took for me. I needed other people. I needed somebody to model what my counselor would say. Well, when my critical parent was going on, she would say, well, what would a loving parent say to that inner child? And I'd just look at her and think, I don't know. And then she would give me options, and she'd say things that just soothed that little girl so much. So we really need each other. And I was so thrilled when the reparenting check-in workshops started, because I was doing those on a 15-minute scale, very small, maybe 10 people, twice a week. And when I did those check-in workshops, I thought, I want to create a format for these smaller pop-in check-in. If you don't know what they are, they're really great. You can check them out online. But it's a way that you hear other people speaking to their inner child and their inner teenager. It's so nourishing, I find. I would say also that this book has had so many revisions. The first draft, oh gosh, I don't even want to go into that, but it was 450 pages. It's supposed to be a spiral book, so that's not going to work. Well, my husband read that thing, and I remember him being in his office sometimes typing and shaking his head like, really? Do we need to say all this? You might have noticed I like to say things and I'm thorough, but oh my gosh, there's a lot of revisions and input. Many people have read the full draft. We were really careful because this is delicate stuff. So we wanted to have a lot of good input from many people at different levels of ACA, different backgrounds. And so we did our best to answer the question, how do I become my own loving parent? Because chapter 8 tells us the solution is to become your own loving parent, but how? How do we do it practically? So I just want to read this testimonial, this review that's on Amazon. And you'll see that on the back of the book, there's some testimonials too that were so inspiring to get from readers of the book. This one says, I'm abbreviating this one a little bit because it's long. It says, a much needed rewrite of the ACA message. This book brings in a sense of warmth, companionship, guidance, and finally, a much needed emphasis on feelings and needs. There are also some new concepts that are spoken of outside of ACA, but this is the first time there has been emphasis on these parts. Hooray, ACA, for being a program that is willing to take chances and evolve as more research is done. And this person says, just FYI, I have read the Red Book, done the 12 steps, and done the laundry list workbook, and this is a very different book in the best of ways. Thank you, ACA, for your many gifts and guidance. So with that, I'd like to close and thank you so much again for your precious gift of attention and for all your warm and lovely faces. It's been so nice to look around, and as I was telling my story, see that people are welcoming and warm. So thank you so much. So we're going to have Guy come up in a little bit, but I do have handouts. So if you're open to doing that, we could do the handouts now. I wanted to go over just a few things on what I think from what we've gotten questions of what would be supportive or things to just think about as you start to work in this guidebook. The first thing is that there are no rules. They're just suggestions. If something doesn't work for you, it's a wonderful way to be your loving parent to say, not now, that doesn't work for me. And to also maybe try it. And if it doesn't work out, that's also good. We talk about being in the challenge zone. There's a cute little image in the preface where you see this child kind of stepping in. She's in the comfort zone where things are safe and she's not taking any healthy risks. And then you see her step into that challenge zone, which is what research says where we learn best. So we don't have too much struggle, but we have some. And we have support if it gets out of hand. So that's one thing. Also, people want to know a lot of times, well, when do I start the guidebook? Should I start it before the yellow book, after the yellow book? And we really, that's one of those questions where Kate and I got on the phone and we spoke with other people too about what do we say here? This is a spiritual program. We can give our suggestions and we tried to keep it open. So you can see page 4 for those suggestions. But in general, it's what I said before, that it's a spiritual program and that I would also trust that if you feel moved to try it, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's when we're ready, we're ready. It took me a long time to be ready for this stuff, but when we're ready, we're ready. I would also say that it's really helpful to speak with ACAs who've done the 12 steps and have reparenting experience just to get some more perspectives for your decision. Also, this book is not meant to be worked alone. It really, because this is a lot of stuff around trauma and dysfunction that we have not really been facing, it's so important to have other people along for the journey. There's a bonus resources page that I think is really cool that has all of these help sheets and options. If on the back of your handout, you'll see a feelings, needs, and physical sensations sheet. This is a great way, if you're not familiar with what you're feeling, to just check this out. I have a friend of mine who he recorded the universal human needs, those ones in bold, and he plays it back for himself and notices what feelings and physical sensations come up. So people can get very creative with this. This is not meant to limit you. There might be more feelings. We just had limited space. And the thing I would say too is this copy has the word respected removed, which was a typo. It's not supposed to be under the feelings. So in your own copy, if you see that, it's not correct. It's respected is not a feeling. Respected is an evaluation. It's really a need, but when we say I feel respected, what we're really saying is when I think I'm being respected, I feel grateful, happy, comfortable, whatever those feelings are. So getting to the more direct feelings than a judgment. That was unfortunate. I was very sad about that. The other thing I would say is so important that this book, even if it's closed, that it's not closed within you, that you carry these tools within you, because it's such in the moment. If I'm stressed out and I can remember to do the reparenting check-in, or at least even say, oh my gosh, how am I feeling? That's a huge game changer. So yeah, as much as you can apply these. And it's so important that we want to reparent from our inner loving parent, not the critical parent who wants that inner child to just shut up and go away. We don't want to reparent in order to. I like to think of it as something that I heard a teacher once say. a parent is with a child with the flu, not because they're trying to get the flu to go away, the flu is going to go away on its own, but because they know that the child is hurting and they need some comfort and love. And there's blank pages in the back of the book that you can use for notes. And we also have in there a suggestion that when you hear people say loving parent words that resonate for you, or ones in the book that really resonate for you, you can make a list in the back of like, these are the ones that work for my inner family, and add your own. Appendix A, if you have any doubts about doing this work, or you think it's silly, or you think it's weird, or you're embarrassed, or you're kind of wondering what your family's going to think. Appendix A goes over doubts, misconceptions, and all of those things to help support you with that. Because false loyalty is a real thing. I mean, it could be why it took me so long to look at all that. I would also recommend that you go through the preface and do the exercises before you get started. That chapter is pretty important because it gives you tools to support you in the rest of it. For example, what are resources that help you calm down? What are resources that help you get a little more energy if you get into frozen state? I'm not going to read them all because they're here for you. But one thing I would also say is what I just said before about the feelings and needs sheet. I personally would carry that around with me. I had to do that when I started learning this stuff because I thought, I don't know what these needs are. And it was really helpful for me to just keep the focus on myself in the here and now. All right, everybody. So I'm just going to open the floor for questions. Anybody have any questions, Guy? How are we doing on the time? Do you want to come up or? Okay.
For an adult child.
Hey, Corey.
I'm not real familiar with the service structure of ACA. Is there a World Service Conference or a General Service Conference?
Yeah, there is.
I noticed on here that it's not WSO approved.
Because I wrote this and I didn't want to go through the long process of putting it through the subcommittee and the literature committee. I just claim that it's mine so that I don't need to go through that process.
Are you trying to get it voted on at the conference?
No, the book, yes, the book. Yeah, the
Yeah.
book will be. But we have a fellowship review process that's new. It's a new process. And that's why, this book has had more input than I think any other ACA book, because we developed a process where a subcommittee or anything that anybody submits to World Services to be published, it has to go through a process of evaluation. So we have reader teams who look at it and say, does it meet the criteria for ACA publication? What do people think about how this works with the other literature we have? But because this book was a ballot proposal, it's why it's produced this way. It's going to be in fellowship review, which means for a period of 1 to 3 years, people in the fellowship will use it. They'll send us in their comments about what's working, what's not working. We've already gotten like, hey, maybe this sentence could say this instead of this. And we'll take all of that with the literature evaluation, and then we'll send it to a conference, an annual business conference for approval. And all those people, the delegates at the conference, will most likely get an ebook version to see if they can read through it and make sure that when they're voting, they know what they're voting on. I don't know if I answered your question. Did I?
You did, absolutely.
Okay, I might have answered more than your question.
Hi, my name is Heather. I'm an I saw when you told your story, you were very, very clear and concise about your recovery piece with your parent relationship. But I didn't hear you talk about having any self-defeating behaviors that you used to dissociate emotionally that a lot of ACA struggle with.
Yeah.
I know that that's something that can impair somebody from
Sure.
moving forward emotionally.
Yeah.
But does the book talk about the myriad ways that we can do that?
Yeah, it does. And it actually goes into that quite a bit in the teenager chapter, because a lot of times it's the inner teenager who wants to numb the feelings of the inner child and just soothe in a way that's not really gonna help out in the long term. But for myself, I used food and That has gotten a lot better, but I used to really, when I was feeling down, I'd hear this, Ben and Jerry's. You need me. So yeah, I have struggled with that. And I had an interesting insight on this 3-week retreat that I was just on and in my home in silence. But I kept noticing, oh wow, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I keep wanting chips and salsa and I'm just overdo it. And I said I was in silence, but I did allow myself to say this to Philippe at that time. Oh my gosh, I keep noticing this pattern. I had journaled about it and I said, I keep noticing this pattern and it happens every afternoon around this time. And he said, oh, it happens every afternoon around this time. Interesting. That's all he said. He was trying to respect my silence. And I had this image come of myself as a little girl in this trailer that we lived in out on one of these farms. And it was around that time of day. And I had had some trauma happen to me. And oh my gosh, it explains so much that my little girl had nowhere to go with her feelings except food. And I have not been doing that since. It's only been maybe 10 days or something, but I haven't noticed that compulsion coming at that time of day. And I did notice the first day after I had that insight, but what I simply did when I felt that, I get images, I get an image of like chips and salsa. And I just said, oh, I was walking and I said, oh, honey, are you feeling bad because of what happened? You need some comfort. And she did. And I was just able to be there for her. And I don't know how it works for other people. I'm sure it's very different, but that was helpful for me. And that was the kind of tools that we're talking about using in the book. So I hope that would be helpful.
My name's, do I just jump in?
Hey, Stephen.
I haven't done the 12 steps, so and I tend to come to things with a right and wrong. I have to do this right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I apologize if this is a question that doesn't make sense. Is the goal to process things such that you say goodbye to your inner child or your inner teenager, and you're left with this new version of yourself that is just your loving parents?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you carry those parts of you your whole life?
Okay, well, I can only speak from my own experience and what I've heard other people say, but for me, my inner child doesn't go away. It just integrates in a way that it doesn't even necessarily integrate. It just becomes more settled. My little girl is way less, has way fewer feelings of unworthiness, and she feels more comfortable and safe. And then her joy and her playfulness can come out more, her creativity. So to me, what we say in the guidebook as well is we have these unhealed, wounded parts of ourselves. And as we recover and become more of our own loving parent, they heal, they can heal. We also talk about some of the things that they're carrying, they can let go of. And so they're not carrying that bundle, that baggage in the same way. But I think it's different for all of us. For example, I still hear my critical parent. My counselor doesn't hear her critical parent anymore. But my suspicion is the more I can continue to notice that critical parent and nurture, it doesn't have the need to do that job anymore because it trusts that the loving parent is taking care of things. The teenager is not going to be as reactive because she trusts that the loving parent is going to take care of boundaries and not allow people to take advantage and things like that. So I don't know, does anybody else have a different experience?
Allison, and I would say it's much more natural now to live satisfactorily and in peace, that no matter what's going on around me, I know I'm okay. So a lot of the fear that I used to live with, because I've nurtured and done this work, is no longer. It doesn't mean it doesn't come up. It just means that I deal with it differently, and my feelings that are associated with that are much more loving and less anxious. And I have energy. energy. So for me, I go by the symptoms that I feel. That's just a different way of stating what you stated.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think maybe I'll just try to restate it best I can for the people on Zoom.
We also
that-
have a couple questions, statements from people on
People
Zoom too.
okay. That Allison was saying that her experience is that those parts of herself are way more comfortable because she has the confidence and security. They have the confidence and security that they're going to be okay no matter what. And so she feels more joy, more energy, and just more natural, like she kind of capturing it. And okay. Thank you. Thanks, Allison. Thank you. Maybe let's take one from Zoom.
All right, let's see, AJ says, Bonnie, thanks for the beautiful, honest, vulnerable, solution-based share. You talked about using step 3 as a tool when you needed to trust your husband and how hard that was. Can you please be more specific about how you used that tool and what exactly that looked like for you? Thanks.
I think I was saying that I was in my step 3 in the yellow book when that situation came up. But how I would use step 3 in a situation where I wanted to trust someone, that I was having past feelings getting in the way of me trusting. One way I do the first 3 steps, and it's in the guidebook as well, is I try to make it really practical. So I try to look at like, what am I not trusting right now in this moment? Oh my gosh, my life has become unmanageable because I am putting the past onto my husband right now. And I'm thinking he's going to be abandoning me like I was abandoned as a child. When I believe that, my life becomes unmanageable. And I am powerless over this wounded inner child who is freaking out right now. But step 2, I want to be restored to sanity. I want to have clarity. I want to be here rather than in that place of the past. And I might not even believe it's possible, but I want to be restored. And then step 3, I'm turning this over. This is too big for me. And I'm turning my inner child. Please help me care for them. Please care for them. And I don't think it addresses exactly what the person is saying because I think it wasn't really what I used for that process. I had to turn it over and over and over when I was in my control and trying to, get signs or whatever else. And that's how I used it for that. Let's go in the back here.
And that 4-step reparenting checklist, like you have a mantra, or how do you review that in the moment?
Yeah, I just know it because I've done it so many times. But what you can think of is what am I feeling? What's my breathing like? So the first one, I think let's see. I just want to. Yeah, I'm just thinking that there's basically what, who, what am I feeling? Who is feeling that? So which part of me? And then what was the trigger? Was it, and I don't go into a lot of detail with the trigger because we can get involved in story and then start that person shouldn't have done that. And it's just simply, was it people, places, or things, or critical parent, or distorted thinking, or some combination? And then the fourth one is, what does this part of me need me to do or need me to say as their loving parent? And the key here is that it's not about repeating words. It's really about creating a connection because we're building trust. Do they trust me? Because they'll know if we're doing it with ulterior motives. So one way you can check in that last step is to ask yourself, am I feeling curious or compassionate or connected to this part of myself, or do I kind of want it to go away? And if it's the latter, maybe wait and do something else before you can do that. Maybe one more on Zoom.
Question on Zoom. Susan says, thank you so much, Bonnie. You mentioned how shame can be a protector. Besides the point you made about if it's my fault, then maybe if I do it differently, then I could get better. Anything else you can say about shame as a protector?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this at all, but I will try to convey what my understanding is, and that is in a lot of the trauma research that's happening, that we're seeing that shame is really, I don't want to be seen. There's something wrong with me. I don't want you to see me. But think about if you've been in that situation yourself, how might it have been protective to not be seen, to be invisible? So it's that tricky thing where part of us wants to be seen, but it was so dangerous in the past to be seen. When we think about abuse, and easier to lay low for some of us. So I think that's how I understand it. And if the other part of it is, if you don't see me, then I'm also not feeling all of the pain about the shame that I have, that I carry. Jay? Okay.
I guess the question I have is that as I continue on my journey in recovery, one of the things is that I have 2 young adult men sons, and one of the challenges is the one that I passed on and the things that come up with shame and guilt. And knowing that I couldn't have done it any better, and I'm okay somewhat with that with myself, but one of the things I'm hoping for in this is it's going to allow me to see both sides of that, like see the reflection of where I could have been potentially if my circumstances were different, the life that I was living at the time. But it still leaves a void with myself, knowing that I would do anything to have my 2 sons get the opportunity to be part of this fellowship. And it's humbling to know that they'll get there if they get there, when they get there. And so I'm hopeful that some of these things will help me do some of the healing that, especially from a parenting perspective, because I think that's one of the most difficult things for me right now. I think I've healed somewhat, and I'll continue to heal and know how I can grow with myself. But I have 2 beautiful human beings that are out there that are just doing their life, and I just have to go ahead and accept that.
Yeah.
And, the last thing I'll share is we were talking about before, I call it my shadow self. My shadow self has to take a look at things from a fear-based perspective, and that for me, the unknown is the truth. The truth of things is unknown. However, that on one side of that you have, faith, hope, and love. On the other side of that, you have that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So we have choices now. Before we did, like we'd always plug into that one part, and then that would just travel us into spirals that we can't hold on to anymore. So being around other people that are loving and caring like you, so I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Yeah, and thank you for the work here. Thank you for doing your work. Because for me, as my mom got this book and she started reading it, and she sent me a text. And she said, "This book is intense. I'm waking up at 3 a.m. with intense guilt. I'm so sorry." And, the key really is you want to look at those feelings that you have. It's completely normal that you would have those feelings because, you did do some things and they did have an impact. But owning it and being with the feelings and then eventually being able to forgive yourself, such a huge gift. And you being a loving parent to yourself, what a beautiful attraction for your sons to come to ACA or want to just be more like you're being. So that's really lovely. And I want to just echo what you say. We have options, and that, what a choice, what a gift. It's Jay. Jack?
Open floodgates, my own questions. What I'd like to say is that I discovered by listening to you here today that my spirit has always been stronger than my thought. And so grateful.
Thank you, Jack. That was really lovely. I want to just repeat it for the people on hybrid that his seeing my tears was opening the floodgate for his tears, and that hearing me today helped him know and trust that his spirit is always stronger than he thought. So thank you. Let me just check with Guy. How are we doing with time? Because we do want to allow time for fellowship.
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
Okay. I'm going to pick people who haven't asked a question yet, and that is,
I just, it's not a question, my name is Bridget, I'm a grateful recovery from child. Bridget, and I just want to speak to the. I
Maybe-
have an adult son.
can they hear her?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, maybe just speak up a little
Okay,
bit.
I have an adult son, and I just want to speak to the way I handle that is the way I try to live my life. By no means do I know everything, but there is power in owning my mistakes. You know, and the sooner I can do that, the better. Having that conversation with them gives him the language to have it, A, and B, gives us the ability to have a more intimate relationship.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
you know, like I said, I'm by no means perfect, but with practice, I learn to understand my shadows and the things that I want to change. And I get to own them and be honest about them. And that takes a lot of that pressure off.
Yeah, I want to repeat that too. Do you think they heard it?
They can hear, I don't know if the people in the room can hear.
Okay, I just repeat it because it's really important message
Yeah.
that being able to be accountable and own your mistakes is so important for that relationship with your, what you're saying that was so important with your relationship with your children, and that gives, what I'm hearing is that gives a basis for intimacy, because you're being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm sorry, and I'm owning it. And then that gives them the opportunity to connect with you. And I think that's so important, because my understanding of this stuff is that a child always wants a relationship with their parent, even if they, I mean, not all, I don't want to say that, but that there's probably a strong likelihood that if a parent were able to change and be available, that a child would want that. Again, I don't want to make a blanket statement.
Yeah, I have a 16-year-old daughter that I try to interact with feelings, to open up feelings. And one of the answers I get from her the most often is bored. And I wanted to ask, that's not.
It's not? It's definitely a feeling, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I wondered why it was on the list, and I wondered, you know, should I ask, how do you do with bored?
Oh, bored's such a good one. That's really, for me, bored, there's a couple things that come to me about that situation. So she's 16. So I don't know, I'm just thinking about the age where talking about feelings and things like that, an intimate conversation with a parent might just not be where she is. But in terms of the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel rule, if this is somewhat new for you, there might be some parts of her, maybe her inner teenager, you know, another part who's like, I don't really trust this, and so I'm going to make fun of it, or I'm going to say I'm bored. The other thing with boredom, I don't really want to talk about that because that's more in the meditation mindfulness zone, but it's sometimes just, I think in our culture right now, so many people are used to very short chunks of information and activity that it's hard to stay present. And so boredom is really, I've stopped paying attention to what's happening, and I'm finding it I'm not interested in the present moment and what's happening. I don't know if that is helpful to you at all, but there's no intention on leaving bored off. So you could write bored on there. Just don't write respected. Just kidding. I don't.
Thank you so much for your honesty and sharing. I'm trying to frame this so that it doesn't sound critical of
Yeah.
the yellow workbook. But even the metaphor of the tree, when I open up that book, I go right to the abyss. I want to name every leaf on that tree.
Mm.
And I think I'm being challenged to name every leaf on the tree. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on how, you know, I like the phrase that you said about identifying a feeling and then connecting it to a wound and then nurturing it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of start for people like me that can go right to the heart of an issue and get stuck there.
Yeah.
How you kind of find that level where you're engaging with your emotions in ways that you can, you might be upset at traffic, but it's not the traffic that's got you, it's something else.
Right, right. Well, there's a potential rewriting of the yellow book that is being considered. I would love to help out with that. Because I think the yellow book is really helpful, but there are definitely things in there that could be reworked. And I would say, I'm not really sure how to respond to your question. So what came to me to say was chapter 10 in this book talks about feelings, and it talks about needs, and it talks about how to identify what I'm truly feeling and needing when I'm in judgment of someone else and judging a situation like traffic. So that might be a helpful chapter to read. And when you're working in the yellow, are you working in the yellow book now?
Oh, but I have.
But you have, okay. Oh, okay, okay. I think what I needed to do for the yellow book was approach it with that loving parent and also with my inner child and inner teenager on board, so that it was almost, the reparenting was infused in it. There are things I did in that workbook where I wrote another column. I got this from somebody else, but it was, what does your inner child want to say to the adult in charge, for one of those columns of the many worksheets we have? And then what would a loving parent say in that situation? And those were, I think for the yellow book for now, we just need to bring in our own tools somehow to make it work for us if we want to do it. I'm going to stop in 1 minute, so I will hear from you. Yes, it's like to have that fear of abandonment. And I think when it's a really, really strong emotion like that, I haven't really been able to do it alone. I've needed to have my sponsor, I've needed to have my counselor, I've needed to have safe people who know how to accompany me. And who knows what's going to be revealed with what's going on with that situation. But if you could get yourself some really good support for that, then it might be easier for you to go into it. I also think there are some tips in here, what to do when the emotion takes us over. And that sounds like what's happening is that whichever part of you is triggered gets so big that there's no space for a loving parent to be there. And so there are techniques like what I needed to do was learn to breathe and bring it down. Whoa, let's look around. We're here. It's okay. Nothing's happening. We're safe now. This is not the same thing as whatever happened that's scaring you. And I just think working with other people is really important because it's delicate. It's really delicate. And if you're not able to look at that sheet, that's why we have each other. But to find people with experience who are safe and that your inner people trust. You could even ask them, do you want to talk about this with these people? And if not, then find other ones.
I already have one that's it's like 1 in the morning.
Yeah, that's all that work we got to set up ahead of time. Like, this is an issue now, which is really great. And then you can take the steps to, kind of like in the preface, get those supportive resources for yourself. Hopefully someone will appear who will be able to help you with it. And therapists, sometimes this stuff, we need a therapist who can help us, who is skilled and has been trained in that. Thanks. Well, thank you everyone for your attention, again, for spending this beautiful day inside. And Lawrence, I'll get with you after.
Bonnie, will you stay up here just for a second, please?
Yes.
Like,
Do I stay on?
yeah, if you would stay on also.
Pleasure.
So glad that we were able to have our first annual event, the Rhode Island Area ACA Intergroup. And with that, Pike, as you know, did the art piece for promoting the event. And we want to, Pike has a gift that she'd like to give you related to that.
Aw.
First, I wanted to say, I did it for my inner teenager. I did my best to do it. And at first I started because I wanted accolades and appreciation. That was the motivation.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to do something. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I haven't been painting or drawing for a while. So I just conjured up my inner child and said, what would you like to do? And I started it. And I just wanted to thank you for being here and doing this. And my interpretation came out from a little kid. And your feedback was so loving and helpful. It motivated me to continue doing it. I've been sketching more, but
Wonderful.
it's not the book cover. It's
Aw.
just for the announcement for this, your
That's beautiful.
participation.
Thank
And
you. Thank you very, yes.
Appreciate it. It was supposed to be on the road to recovery, and Bonnie said, well, we appreciate the image, but it's very different than what we anticipated in doing the book. And we had a lot of people working on the book, but she said, it looks like the parent is not loving. It looks like he's crying. And the kids look like they're tortured and not really, they're struggling, they're not playing. So I looked at it and I said, oh my God, it was, it was my inner child, like dealing with the parent that's kind of missing. And when you gave the loving feedback, I said, okay, we can make it smile. We can make it happy. We don't have to be embarrassed for being happy, joyous, and free.
Aw,
So-
that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turn myself off.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. I mean, I what a great introduction to the Loving Parent Guidebook. I really appreciate that. Thank you for coming to the first annual Rhode Island Area ACA event. I believe it's been recorded, and so you might be able to view it also. That'll probably come out on the internet, and if you want to re-see your story, you can do that. I know that's really hard for me to see when I do that, but maybe Philippe will want to look it over. Who knows? I want to thank the committee. The committee has been phenomenal. There's probably been 12 or 15 people that have worked on this. It all came out of a little thought on Joe G's part. So a special thanks to Joe G for that. Pretty awesome. 6 months or so ago, he's like, let's see if we can get somebody in here. And I think Lawrence might have said, hey, Bonnie would be a great person. So anyway, that's phenomenal. And thanks so much to the whole committee for doing that as well. I want to thank the Salvation Army. They donated their space. Pretty phenomenal. Major Brian Thomas, such a love for the recovering community. You know, he has Freedom Hall over here, and he's like, any 12-step program, any time of day, you're welcome. And we said, hey, we kind of need a different space that has technology. And he's like, hey, we'll open the chapel up for you. How is that? And look what we got. Is this something else? So if you have ideas in the future, we want to do a second, third, and fourth. If anybody has a burning thought like Joe did about doing this, please bring that forward and let's get it into the group and get some group effort for doing this for next year. I want to remind you, you can donate through PayPal or cash. And we want to close with the ACA Serenity Prayer if we could. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and work it, you're well worth it. As John